Vampire Survivors is the model for the future of the FPS genre. Okay, yeah, that statement probably doesn't make that much sense right now, but let me cook. I'll get us there. Vampire Survivors released in early access in late 2021, but took the gaming world by storm largely in 2022. And you probably already know about it, but if you don't, let's just put it this way. It's a simple game built on the premise of what if we made a bullet hell where the player is the bullet hell? Your controls are literally just WASD, and you walk around to collect upgrades that make your screen slowly turn into an incomprehensible mass of enemies being deleted from existence. And that's it. You can replay the game practically forever, it gets new content all the time, and it's cheaper than a beer while giving infinitely more dopamine. And I like beer. Now, I'm not going to sit here and claim that Vampire Survivors was an easy game to make. I'm not a developer myself, and if anyone could have done it, they just would have. But not long after this game hit mainstream popularity, something really interesting happened. Now, normally when a new trend starts getting popular, especially among the indie scene, it takes a few years for everyone to catch up and release their take on it. In fact, we're seeing this phenomenon in the retro FPS space right now, with games like Dusk and Ultrakill having released a few years ago and steadily gained popularity over the years to follow. Now, over the past year and into this year, we're seeing the floodgates open to all sorts of games from devs that seem pretty clearly inspired by these games being announced or released. Vampire Survivors, on the other hand, experienced this sort of thing on a greatly accelerated timeline. Tons of clones, permutations, and what I will call Vampire Survivors likes, for lack of a better term, came out over the course of 2022. And while you might just consider this trend hopping, I have a bit of a different opinion. Vampire Survivors and its many spiritual successors are a genuinely perfect example of indie development done very right. Built on a simple but basically endlessly extensible base, the way this game is designed not only makes it incredibly seamless to inject new weapons, upgrades, levels, and so on into this game to extend its own replayability into infinity, but it's also a replicable framework that other devs can take the core principles of and fairly simply give their own take on. Instead of viewing it as Vampire Survivors and a bunch of copycats, the way I've seen it is that Vampire Survivors has clearly provided the jolt that many extremely creative and capable devs needed to just release a game. And best of all of these games basically cost less than a beer as well, for the most part. So even though each and every one might not be an incredibly fresh experience, the prospect of, I kind of like watching hordes of enemies explode over and over again, has carried enough weight that I've bought and played probably 10 or more of these games just this year, all together for the price of less than a AAA game. Now, you might still be wondering what this has to do with the FPS genre. Well, as much as the genre has found a renewed sense of wonder for myself and many others through the resurgence of boomer shooters and retro stylings, there's still always new directions it could be going, bad habits and outdated ideas it could be shedding, and ways for new ideas to break in and shake things up. And I firmly believe that taking a page out of Vampire Survivors and its horde of imitators book could be exactly what this genre needs to keep the good times rolling into the distant future. In other words, the FPS genre needs to embrace tiny games. I think the game that really hammered this idea home for me recently was Goblins. Now, in the same sense that Vampire Survivors asks, what if we did a bullet hell, but you're the bullet hell? Goblins asks, what if there was goblins and they're chopping? On the surface, there is really nothing specifically remarkable about Goblins. While this might actually sound like a criticism or a reason not to check it out, I actually will argue that this is the greatest thing it has going for it. Goblins is just a game-ass game. There's just a metric ton of game packed into this less than an hour runtime, and that alone is impressive. I think while Goblins is undoubtedly a good game, I find it even more impressive on a meta level and how its limited scope is actually perhaps the best thing it has going for it. Created by Szymanski, the mastermind behind Dusk and one half of the developer tour de force behind Gloomwood, Goblins is a non-New Blood affiliated solo offering from the developer, something that he has seen quite a bit of success in recently after having released Iron Lung earlier this year as well. Unlike the slow-burning horror of Iron Lung, however, Goblins is a bite-sized FPS game very reminiscent of Dusk, minus basically only the ability to jump and being about 1/6 the length at most. You'll see hallmarks of the elements I'm sure you, like me, undoubtedly loved in Dusk, like the amazing level design, secrets hidden all over the game's 5 maps, and plenty of absurd humor. And you can and should be able to experience all of it in one sitting. The only reason, really, if you loved Dusk and wouldn't also like Chop Goblins, is if it really bothered you that there wasn't just way more of it. But in the same way that Vampire Survivors' extremely simplistic gameplay actually turns out to be a massive boon to its quality overall, I'm going to make the same argument that Chop Goblins' intentionally short runtime actually makes it a much better game, and is something that I believe developers hoping to break into this genre can learn from. The fact of the matter is that Chop Goblins is a game that probably doesn't get made at all without the commitment to a short runtime. Or if it does, it wouldn't be the same or wouldn't be nearly as good as it is. The beauty of this game is that it drip feeds its meaty and well-designed arsenal of weapons, hilarious moments and absurd enemies, eclectic locations and tightly designed maps to the player at just the right pace, and then just ends before it runs out of ideas. Oh, and you can, of course, parry attacks for no reason other than it's cool, so why the fuck not? You can parry them back! Wait, do it again. Oh! Holy shit! I feel like I can't stress enough how many lessons I feel some FPS games can learn from Chop Goblins. For some reason, every boomer shooter these days feels like it needs to have an epic 3-act experience to go with it. And don't get me wrong, there are so many great games structured like this that I can hardly list them all. But I'm just going to be blunt about it. Not every game in this genre coming out these days has 3 acts worth of good ideas to justify the length. I feel like this trend goes all the way back to Doom, but truth be told, not even the original Doom was really justified in having 3 acts worth of content, other than probably just to justify its price tag at the time. And modern Doom games have even moved entirely away from this structure. Not only that, but so many of these games are being made by solo devs, taking on huge 3-act games as their first foray into development. It kind of just makes me wonder how many great ideas are being left on the table just because they can't quite be stretched to a quote-unquote full game, or even just never see it all the way to completion. Now, while Chop Goblins is mostly a collection of familiar ideas, done well and wrapped up in a nice and concise package, the consistent quality throughout this bite-sized package is what really hammers home the sentiment that we absolutely need more games that aren't afraid to risk understaying their welcome. Priced at $5, you don't quite get your dollar per hour value out of this game, if for some reason you even still care about stuff like that. But in my opinion, the quality present here completely justifies that price. But if Chop Goblins doesn't offer enough in the way of mechanical innovation for you, then I have something else to suggest. Much like Vampire Survivors takes a relatively simple concept and stretches it in almost every direction it can go, it started, first and foremost, almost as a toy. And I think we need more developers unafraid to make and release toys. Though Vampire Survivors now has an extensive progression system, tons of stuff to grind and unlock, and multiple maps to play through where something resembling a story evolves, it started off as a toy, a simple premise of what if you could be the bullet hell, and follows through on it and creates a compelling game around it. One of the best examples of this type of thing in FPS form, in my opinion, is the game Devil Daggers. Now, the depth of Devil Daggers' design is of course betrayed by its simplicity, but it's a game so tightly packaged and stripped free of unnecessary bullshit that the arena is literally a brown circle. You have one single weapon, all of your HUD is diegetic, and yet it's incredible. There is literally zero fluff. Devil Daggers really needs no introduction at this point, but what astounds me about Devil Daggers is that despite being a distinctly retro FPS game that released and saw significant success well before something like Dusk, just as an example, so many more modern takes on the genre have followed Dusk's epic linear act structure than Devil Daggers' simplistic and replayable model. It is truly surprising that there aren't many more examples of games in the vein of it, at least not until fairly recently. Now, Impaler is an FPS game that isn't afraid to ask, what if we made an FPS, but with spikes? And that's it. That's the game. Okay, there's a little more to it than that. The game is a bit of a finite score attack game with a mild roguelike element. You select one single gun to begin a run, and then you kill stuff to gain currency that is used at the end of waves to take upgrades. Wait, does this sound kind of familiar? Huh. But what ties all of Impaler's little mechanics together is the spike, what is this thing? Trident? With this, thing, you can summon spikes in a short radius around your character. And from these spikes come killing potential, movement tech, map reconstruction, and just oh so much ooey gooey depth to what, again, is otherwise an extremely simple concept. And it's just so goddamn good. Impaler right now is still a little bit more of a toy. There's some progression and optional achievements to go for, but you can burn through this stuff fairly quickly. And still, if you could believe it, Impaler was actually the only game I 100%ed, at least in terms of Steam achievements, in 2022. And that's even with a ton of time poured into both Neon White and Elden Ring as well. The mechanics just felt so good and had so much oomph and depth to them that I just kept replaying it over and over again, even beyond completing the toughest 2 achievements, which are finishing the game with only guns and finishing the game without guns. Supposedly the developer still has plans to expand the game, and I can't wait to see that if and when it arrives. But even right now, the game is like $3, and again, absolutely delivers the shit out of the premise it sets out to. And regardless of whether you play around with it for just a little bit, or over and over again like I did, I think this game is worth your time and worth a look for how it takes a simple premise and builds something awesome around it. I think there's so much more value in games that have great core ideas and choose to just celebrate them and make the most of them. I think I'd rather see the FPS genre, as it goes through a bit of a renaissance, have more games like this than games that squander great ideas with mediocre execution, when they're too invested in just making way more game than they honestly need. And for that reason, I think we need more bite-sized FPS games. I have, of course, noticed a few more games like this cropping up, and I'm hoping that this trend continues to gain some steam. I've played and covered Force Reboot on the channel in the past, and this game has since released and definitely improved significantly on the concept since the demo. Meat Grinder is a pretty interesting game on my radar with a combination of ideas that has a demo out now as well. But I think I've said enough that I'm gonna call it there. My videos have honestly been getting way too long lately, and I think a video on small games warrants a comparatively small video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.
Hit that like button.
Alright.
Smash that bell, hit that bell button, hit
Destroy my pussy.
Subscribe to Dumper Man.